Botany is the study of plants. Everything from biochemical reactions to whole forests. What's so interesting about plants? As my dad commented when I first said I was thinking of studying plants, he said, "But you can't take a plant on a date." He's a dentist, so he works with people. And I knew what he meant. At first glance, plants seem, well, a little boring perhaps. They don't talk, they don't move, they may not ignite our compassion like animals. And yet, I would argue that they do talk in a language that's different than ours. But it's communication all the same. They do move. Some even move faster than we do. Plants have a quieter way of igniting our passion because we all know that we're dependent on plants. It's easy to take them for granted, but wherever we look, I think we can be surprised at what's out there in the plant kingdom. Let me show you what I mean with a few examples. To give you a picture of some of the incredible diversity of some 300,000 species of plants, let me introduce you to a few interesting and very different plants. Consider the dodder. The dodder plant is a parasitic plant, which means it gets all of its nutrition from other plants. Dodder is the common name, and it really refers to an entire genus of plants, and that genus is called Cuscuta. Interestingly, Cuscuta is an old medieval term for one who dodders, which means one who shakes or trembles, especially with old age. Because this plant is parasitic, it will oftentimes have no chlorophyll or leaves of its own, and its leaves are so tiny they're easily overlooked and have a bright orange color. It's found all over the United States, so it's clearly found a good way to make a living. I'm not sure why it has the common name of something that shakes and trembles. Maybe it's the effect it has on other plants. Research with the dodder plant shows that it's anything but trembling. In fact, it doesn't attack a host randomly. It actually searches out for a host it prefers. Research into chemical signaling in plants and animals by Dr. Consuelo de Moraes was able to show that dodder vines grow towards plants. They don't grow towards empty pots. What's more, if the dodder plant is given a choice between a tomato plant or a wheat plant, it will always choose the tomato plant. Apparently, the wheat plants produce a substance that the dodder plants can't stand. So Dr. de Moraes wanted to see just how strong the dodder's response were to tomato plants. In fact, according to a 2012 article in Scientific American, she wanted to test the hypothesis that the dodder plants could smell the tomato. We normally don't think of plants as being capable of smelling since they lack noses, but what if the definitive marker for a sense of smell was just a response to an olfactory cue? If that's the case, could dodder respond to the smell or the chemical signal from tomato? To test this hypothesis, Dr. de Moraes actually made a tomato perfume concocted from the chemicals one would actually find on the tomato plant. Anyone who's grown tomatoes knows that these plants have a lot of sticky fluid all over the leaves and stems, and it's pretty pungent. She then soaked cotton swabs with the tomato perfume to see if dodder plants would take the bait. And they did. They grew toward the cotton swabs that smelled like tomatoes. So plants can be surprising in their abilities. Perhaps you never thought a plant could smell you, but maybe they can. Another example of a unique plant or a group of plants are the living stone plants from South Africa. These plants literally look like small stones. If you didn't know they were plants, you might walk right over them. Fascinating trait of these plants is that they have windows. I'll bet you didn't know that plants had windows. And for those of you who know that leaves absorb light for photosynthesis, you're probably thinking, why would a plant have transparent tissue? It's not exactly like cellophane, more like a translucent membrane. The stone plant looks a bit like a cactus, though it isn't. It's a whole different family. Cactuses are found natively in the New World, and the living stone plants, known as lithops, are native to the Old World. So as I said, these plants are mainly below ground with just the very top of the plant protruding above the soil. In some of these plants, the part protruding is transparent. At first thought, the reason for the transparency may seem obvious. The window allows light to penetrate deep into the plant for photosynthesis. But, as I tell my students, botany isn't rocket science. It's more complicated. Why would I say that? I mean, no disrespect to rocket science, but the math and physics of rocket science always stay the same, no matter where you are on Earth. Even in space, where the force of Earth's gravity does change, but everything is still governed by the same principles. Botany, on the other hand, is not like math or physics. There are very few rules. The rules that do exist always seem to have exceptions. Everything about plants comes in a lot of unique forms and functions. For example, I can't say all plants have flowers. Most plants, over 85% of all plant species, do have flowers. And there are some 40,000 other species of plants that have no flowers at all. Nor can I say all plants have seeds, since non-seed plants are almost as numerous as non-flowering plants. So I hope you see what I mean. Very few rules in botany. So back to our leaf windows in the living stone plant. It may seem obvious that the window lets light penetrate, but when scientists started working with the plant, they found that high light levels actually decreased photosynthetic rates. Just like us, plants can get too much sun. When they do, the photosynthetic machinery can't keep up and the rate of photosynthesis declines. The experimenters found a sweet spot with the amount of light, and that sweet spot was the amount of light typical for a cloudy day. Sure enough, when the investigators looked at the distribution of living stone plants with windows, they found them occurring in areas with lots of cloudy days. The window lets in more light on a cloudy day, but can't let in too much light on a sunny day. So the window adaptation is an adaptation for plants growing in lower light environments. Not what you might think when you first hear about windows and leaves. And with so many scientific advances, there are also more and more practical benefits to studying plants too. I want to give you 3 specific examples where a little knowledge about plants goes a long way. It's my hope that this course will give you more than a little knowledge about plants, and that by the end of the course, you'll come to see plants in a whole new light. The first example comes from trees. Everyone knows that trees consume carbon dioxide and produce oxygen. So if you lived in a city looking to improve its air quality, you might want to plant a bunch of trees. But what if some trees could actually contribute to climate change? This turns out to be true. Scientists have long known that some trees emit volatile organic compounds, or VOCs. When these VOCs meet nitrogen oxides produced by our cars in the presence of sunlight, they help the formation of tropospheric ozone. Now you might say, oh good, that ozone will help to repair the ozone hole. And it is the same kind of molecule, but the ozone I'm talking about occurs in the troposphere, where we are. The thinning of the ozone layer, it's not really a hole per se, is occurring in the stratosphere, particularly over Antarctica, but potentially over the Arctic as well. This ozone is in the stratosphere and protects us from harmful ultraviolet radiation, which can cause skin cancer and cataracts. But the ozone in the troposphere is not so good. In fact, tropospheric ozone goes by the unflattering name of smog. And the smog triggers asthma in kids, and it is also the primary component of air pollution in cities. Smog is what gives my hometown of Denver the brown cloud on high ozone days. Now back to the trees that can contribute to this smog. Not all trees produce the VOCs that contribute to smog, but some do, and in large amounts. According to a study done by the U.S. Forest Service in Brooklyn, sycamores, locust trees, and oaks were among the greatest VOC contributors. Maybe all that air pollution in LA is just a result of all those California sycamores? Unlikely. There are a lot of cars in the LA basin. But the Blue Ridge Mountains in Appalachia get their name from the blue haze caused by isoprene, a VOC emitted from trees there. However, not all trees are emitters. Some trees emit very little isoprene, like redbuds, witch hazel trees, and tulip trees. The point here is not that planting trees is bad. The point is that a little botanical knowledge can help citizens make good decisions about which trees will help improve air quality. Another example where botanical knowledge would come in handy pertains to rubber. Henry Ford was well known for trying to control every part of production for his automobiles. One aspect of the control was over rubber. The rubber just wasn't used for tires, it was and still is used for many of those hoses and connections within the vehicle. Henry Ford bought a rubber plantation in 1927. The scientific name for the rubber tree is Hevea brasiliensis. As the name suggests, it's native to Brazil, where it grows sporadically in the rainforest. Ford bought his plantation in the Amazon, where this tree is found natively. But within a few years, the plantation failed. Why? In nature, rubber trees never grow in clusters, but in the plantation, they were all planted close together, so close that a disease was able to spread through the entire plantation. And that disease was South American leaf blight, or Microcyclus uli, which is also native to Brazil. When trees grow far apart, the chance of the disease getting from one tree to another is small, but if the trees are close together, it's like putting a toddler in a candy store. Bonanza. Interestingly, most rubber today is grown in Southeast Asia. There's also a rubber resurrection, and more things are being made with natural rubber. For example, Patagonia started making wetsuits from natural rubber instead of neoprene. The success of rubber in Southeast Asia has to do with the fact that the climate of Southeast Asia is agreeable to rubber trees, but also that the South American leaf blight has not yet made its way to Southeast Asia. However, most botanists think it's just a matter of time before this blight makes it over to Southeast Asia. Like Henry Ford's plantation, this could be disastrous for the plantations in Southeast Asia. There may be trees in Brazil that are naturally resistant to the blight, or scientists may be able to develop a variety of rubber tree that has resistance to the blight. But this isn't happening. When the blight hits Southeast Asia, the research on these fronts will most likely begin in full force. Let's consider what's happening with bananas. All bananas that are in the supermarket today are not only the same variety, they are exact clones of each other. Just as there are different varieties of apples, for example, Granny Smith, Red Delicious, and my favorite, Braeburn, there are different varieties of bananas, but the one everyone eats is called Cavendish. We don't really think about varieties of bananas because our stores only carry the one type, and all of those individuals are genetically identical. The seeds inside are too immature to grow, so Cavendish bananas are effectively seedless and unable to mutate. So when tropical race 4, a banana fungal disease called Fusarium oxysporum, FSP cubens, reaches Latin America, the banana plantations will be susceptible to total failure. What's interesting is that FSP, which is a term botanists use to say this is a different form of this disease. That abbreviation, FSP, could be used for plants too, and it means that this new form of the disease or plant doesn't need to be its own subspecies, but we need a way to classify it separately from other forms. Tropical race number 1 overwhelmed a previous clone banana that everyone was eating in the 1950s. That was what led to the more fungus-resistant Cavendish. A more colloquial name for these tropical race diseases is Panama disease, which attacked bananas in 1874, oddly enough, in Australia. By 1890, the earlier form has made its way to Panama, where it earned its nickname. At least the rubber trees weren't genetically identical. So far, research has identified possible varieties of banana that appear to be resistant to tropical race 4. Botanists are working hard on this. So these are 3 stories about plants that give you some insight into the variety that encompasses botany, and the variety we will investigate in this course. I next want to tell you about how I got into botany. I want to tell you this to inspire you that it's possible to be a botanist without being born with a deep love for plants. I did spend a lot of time outside as a kid, but I never considered the plants. I enjoyed finding frogs and turtles in the creek behind my house. My first real memory of having anything to do with plants, other than watching Dad mow the lawn, was building a lean-to at day camp. We ravaged that forest for branches and picked grass and leaves to throw on top. Fast forward to college, and I was pre-med, like pretty much everyone else studying biology. My college required that all students take a plant class in order to earn a degree in biology. I didn't really want to take a plant class. I wanted more human anatomy or physiology. I took the plant class. It was okay. But it was a lot of taxonomy and memorization, and the magic of plants, the wonder of them, just didn't grab me at that time. So in this course, I've tried to give you the wonder of plants, their stories, and the interesting things about them. After that first plant class, I graduated and applied to medical school. The summer after college graduation, I got a job as a wilderness guide that involved some backpacking along with other adventures in the West. While hiking high in the mountains, I was noticing all the flowers in the alpine and thinking about how beautiful they were. I especially noticed a plant called the alpine forget-me-not. Its scientific name is Erythricium nanum. Of course, I didn't know that scientific name at the time. I was just captivated by what I think we can all agree is one of the most beautiful colors to be found in flowers, deep blue. There aren't very many true blue flowers. According to David Lee, a retired professor of biology at Florida International University, fewer than 10% of all flowering plants are blue. Dr. Lee also wrote the book Nature's Palette, The Science of Plant Color. In this book, he explains that plants don't have a blue pigment. Green is from chlorophyll, yellow and orange are from beta-carotene, red and pink are the anthocyanins. In order to get blue, Dr. Lee explains, plants must modify their anthocyanins by using pH shifts and mixing pigments, molecules, and ions. It's a bit like mixing up watercolors. A combination of yellow paint and green paint makes blue paint. Of course, I didn't know anything about anthocyanins staring into the yellow center of the brilliant blue alpine forget-me-not. That plant made me think that maybe I wanted to experience and understand more stuff like this. But who was I kidding? Get paid to hike around the mountains and just look at plants? Jobs like that don't exist. I decided not to go to medical school, and instead I would take some more classes and think about my next move. I took a plant identification course, and in that identification course, I discovered that I actually liked plants a lot. I thought, maybe I'll go to graduate school. Now look, graduate school isn't all roses and chocolates, but I had a blast. I was falling in love. When you fall in love, it takes time. Love at first sight is just really liking the way a person looks and thinking that maybe you could love them. When I saw those alpine plants, I had a feeling like that. Maybe I could love these plants. And when you get to know something really intimately, then you can begin to love them. George Washington Carver, the botanist who studied alternative crops to cotton, such as peanuts and sweet potatoes, has a lovely quote that sums up my feelings here. He wrote, "Anything will give up its secrets if you love it enough." Not only have I found that when I talk to the little flower or to the little peanut, they will give up their secrets, but I have found that when I silently commune with people, they give up their secrets also, if you love them enough. So plants are like people. When we really give our attention to something, we can't help but begin to love it. When I started to study plants, really look at them, really learn their stories, it was the beginning of a lifelong relationship. It's a relationship I hope you will all develop as well. Because I want you to have a relationship with plants, I will sometimes use their scientific names. When you meet someone for the first time, you typically ask their name. And once you develop a relationship with that someone, you know their full name and maybe one or more of their nicknames. You don't say, "Hi, tall guy with brown hair, how are you?" And so it is with plants. Like us, plants have a first name and a last name. Their first name is the genus name, so it represents a larger group, sort of like our last name. Their second name is called the specific epithet. And those two names, the genus name and the specific epithet, make up the scientific name of each species of plant. Now, there are over 300,000 species of plants, and even the best botanists in the world don't know the scientific names for all 300,000. But just as there are over 7 billion people on the planet and you don't know everyone's name, you still make an effort to learn names. And we will make that effort here. At first, the names may seem cumbersome and difficult to pronounce. Some awkwardness is always present when one learns a new language. I think you will begin to see, though, that scientific names will sometimes be very useful in describing something about the plant. After all, while every single person on the planet is a member of the species called Homo sapiens, there are an estimated 300,000 different species of plants, with a couple thousand more discovered every year. There are even estimates about how many plants remain to be discovered. And this is why many of the number of species of plants will be estimates. There are unknown plants, and there are different traits to consider when deciding how to define a species. Although this course is not strictly about plant identification, I will introduce you to many plants and the ways that they're classified. A field guide is simply a book to identify organisms in their natural habitat. There are field guides for birds, mammals, and plants. These guides are meant to be used in the field, and they're often organized by flower color, so one needn't know a lot of botany in order to use them. Field guides to trees are often organized by leaf shape and bark appearance. It's a lot like a matching game. Anyone with careful observation skills can identify a common plant or a tree using a field guide. But it's helpful to find the most local field guide you can. Most states have their own field guides for common trees or common wildflowers. Larger states like California will have guides for particular parts of the state. The field guides are great for common species, but they won't include everything, and that's where a manual or a flora comes in. These are books that will identify plants of a region down to species using a dichotomous key. A manual might be for a particular group of plants, say the grasses, whereas a flora is meant to be an exhaustive account of all the plant species in a specific geographic region. Many of us tend to forget that plants form the majority of our economic system, either as food, medicine, perfume, raw material for building, fuels, paper, clothing, furniture, and we don't even have to pay for plants' number one contribution to our survival: oxygen. According to a 2015 estimate by Royal Botanic Gardens Kew, 10% of the world's plant species already have documented uses. For example, the number 2 traded commodity in the world is a plant: coffee. The number 1 traded commodity, if you're wondering, was plants. Now, fossilized plants or oil. Because coffee is grown and consumed on such a wide basis, the way coffee is grown can be a boon or a bust to an ecosystem. In addition to wanting you to develop a closer relationship with plants, all kinds of plants, I have a few other goals for you in this course as well. I'd like you to understand the fascinating differences and similarities between plants and animals. I'd like you to get better acquainted with the various parts of the plant and what they do. I want you to understand the basic process of photosynthesis and evolution. And after we've established this foundational knowledge, we'll take an evolutionary walk through plant development, and I hope you'll gain an appreciation for the adaptations that plants have developed over time, from mosses to ferns, then conifers, and then flowering plants. And once we reach flowering plants, we'll take a biome approach, looking more closely at plants in specific environments, from the ocean to the mountains. Along the way, we'll also learn about physiology in plants, and we'll meet some other organisms that aren't plants, but are either similar to plants in their makeup or necessary for plants to survive. And when you complete this course, you'll be a botanist, and botanists make great protagonists. E.T. was the earliest film I remember as an example. You may not remember, but E.T. and his friends were on planet Earth collecting plants. Do you remember the female lead in the first Jurassic Park in 1993? Dr. Ellie Sattler was a paleobotanist, and in the movie, she correctly diagnosed a dinosaur that was sick from eating a poisonous plant. I think we can all agree that the sequel to Jurassic Park, Jurassic World, isn't nearly as good because the lead protagonist is not a botanist. Of course, many people have seen the movie Avatar, and you may recall that Sigourney Weaver was, in fact, a botanist. Even Matt Damon famously saves himself while stranded on Mars because he is a botanist. In a great example of truth-following fiction, scientists in Australia named a new species after the character's name, Mark Watney. The new species is called Solanum watneyi. This was an especially good choice for the plant to be named after the character because this plant is the same family as potato, Solanum tuberosum, which is what Mark Watney grows on Mars to save himself. Now granted, I did my doctorate at UCLA, so I have a special penchant for Hollywood botanists, but I also think their presence in so many feature films is evidence of what we all know. Botany will save our lives. And yet, there is a real, though avoidable, phenomenon known as plant blindness. This term was first coined by Dr. James H. Wandersee, who was at Louisiana State University, and Dr. Elizabeth Schessler, now a professor at University of Tennessee, Knoxville. We go about our business, but we don't really see or know about the plants around us. Even as children, we focus on animals. Everyone knows how a giraffe differs from an elephant, but how does the century plant, Agave americana, differ from Araucaria araucana, the national tree of Chile? How does the rare flower of Amorphothallus titanum, the Titan arum, differ from Musa sapientum, the tree that gives us bananas? What separates living stone plants from the giant Amazon water lily, Victoria amazonica? We know the difference between cardinals and robins, but how does an elm differ from a birch? The answer is in the leaf base, the part of the leaf that attaches to the stem or the petiole of the leaf. It's uneven in elms and straight across in a birch. What schoolchild learns this? Ironically, 100 years ago, identifying what a plant is played a more widespread role in education and daily life, whereas only recently have plant scientists been developing a much deeper understanding of how plants do what they do. Not only is plant knowledge useful, necessary, and life-saving, it's also a good way of life. Celebrating the secrets of nature, something I call natura revelata, provides joy and satisfaction, even if other pursuits aren't so fulfilling. The revelry we can experience at knowing the names and stories of the plants around us really is a field party. My hope in this course is to open your eyes to the full science of botany, old and new, that is all around us. The what and the how. Once we pay attention, we see a world that is too wonderful to ignore.